Have you ever watched someone sell their dignity for a stack of cash? Richard Sterling thought that's exactly what was happening. He stood in the middle of the crowded ballroom at the Pierre Hotel, sneering as he threw $10,000 bill by bill into his ex-wife's face. He told the room she was a leech. He told the press she was nothing without him. He was wrong, because the man didn't realize that the very money in his hand, the suit on his back, and the building we were standing in were all owned by her. This is the story of how the invisible wife destroyed an arrogant empire without ever raising her voice. The divorce papers had been signed for exactly 6 hours when Richard Sterling decided to make it a public spectacle. It was the annual Sterling Future Gala, held in the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City. The air smelled of expensive perfume, stale champagne, and aggressive ambition. Richard, the CEO of Sterling Logistics, was the man of the hour. He was 42, handsome in a way that money can buy teeth veneered to perfection, a tan from St. Bart's, and a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. Hanging on his arm was Chloe de Winters, a 23-year-old influencer whose primary contribution to society was unboxing videos and looking adoringly at Richard. And then there was Isabella. Isabella Hart, formerly Sterling, stood near the back of the room by the kitchen doors. She wasn't wearing a designer gown. She wore a simple, charcoal grey dress that she'd owned for 3 years. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, practical bun. For the last 10 years, the world knew her as Richard's quiet, mousy wife. The one who stayed home. The one who didn't understand business. The one Richard had famously called an anchor dragging down my potential during a leaked audio recording from a board meeting 3 months ago. She wasn't supposed to be here. The security guards had hesitated, but Isabella had simply shown an invitation that oddly didn't have a barcode, but was embossed with a gold crest they didn't recognize. They let her in out of confusion, more than anything else. She walked straight toward the center table. The room went silent. The clinking of silverware stopped. A hush fell over the 300 guests, New York's elite sharks who smelled blood. "Richard," Isabella said. Her voice was low, devoid of emotion. "We need to talk about the settlement checks." They bounced. A ripple of laughter went through the room. Richard turned slowly, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked at Chloe, smirked, and then turned his predatory gaze onto his ex-wife. "Isabella." He sighed loud enough for the back row to hear. "I told my lawyers to handle the trash. Why are you here? Did you run out of grocery money already?" "The checks bounced, Richard." She repeated, her posture stiff. "The bank said insufficient funds. I just want what was agreed upon. $5,000 for the month. That's all." Richard threw his head back and laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Insufficient funds. Sterling Logistics just posted a quarterly profit of $12 million. You think I don't have $5 grand? He set his glass down on the table with a heavy thud. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, folded stack of fresh $100 bills. He had brought it for the charity auction later to show off. "You want money?" Richard stepped closer, invading her personal space. The scent of his expensive cologne, Santal 33, was overpowering. "You've been bleeding me dry for a decade, sitting at home doing nothing while I built this company, while I built this legacy." He snapped the rubber band off the stack of cash. "Dance for it, Bella," he whispered, just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "Richard, don't," she said. Her eyes weren't pleading, though. They were warning, but he was too drunk on his own ego to see it. "Here's your settlement." He took a handful of bills and threw them. They didn't fly gracefully. They slapped against her chest and fluttered to the floor. He grabbed another handful. He threw them at her face. The sharp edge of a crisp bill nicked her cheek. "Take it!" he shouted, his face twisting into a mask of rage. "Pick it up. That's what you are, a scavenger." The room was dead silent. A few people looked uncomfortable, but no one moved. In this circle, you didn't interrupt Richard Sterling. He was too powerful. You just watched the car crash. Isabella stood frozen. The money littered the floor around her cheap heels. Chloe de Winters giggled, covering her mouth with a manicured hand. "Pick it up," Richard hissed, pointing at the floor. "Pick it up and get out of my sight. And if you ever come back to my hotel or my company again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." Isabella looked at the money. Then she looked up at Richard. For the first time all night, a small, ghost-like smile touched her lips. It wasn't a smile of submission. It was the smile of an executioner, checking the sharpness of the blade. "Your hotel?" she asked softly. "My hotel. My company. My world. You're just a guest in it, and your time is up." Isabella nodded slowly. She didn't bend down. She didn't pick up a single bill. She reached into her clutch, a worn leather thing, and pulled out a phone. It wasn't the cracked iPhone 8 Richard thought she used. It was a sleek black satellite phone with no brand markings. She pressed one button and held it to her ear. "It's done," she said into the phone. "Execute Order 66. Cut him off. Everything." She hung up, turned on her heel, and walked away. The crowd parted for her, like the Red Sea, not out of respect, but out of sheer confusion. Richard yelled after her, "That's right. Walk away, and leave the money. You don't deserve it." He turned back to his guests, spreading his arms wide, trying to regain the room's energy. "Apologies, everyone. Sometimes you have to take out the trash manually. Now let's get back to the auction." He didn't notice that his phone sitting on the table had started to buzz. Then Chloe's phone buzzed. Then the CFO's phone at table 4 buzzed. The massacre had begun. Isabella walked out of the Plaza Hotel and into the biting November wind of Central Park South. The doorman, a kind man named Henry, whom she had known for years, looked at her with pity. "Taxi Mrs. Sterling?" he asked gently. "It's Miss Hart, Henry, and no thank you." As she descended the final step, a car pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a yellow cab. It wasn't an Uber. It was a phantom black Rolls-Royce Phantom 8 with tinted windows so dark they looked like voids. The license plate was simple IH1. Henry the doorman dropped his clipboard. The rear door opened not by a driver, but automatically. Isabella slid inside. The interior was a sanctuary of white leather and silence. Sitting on the opposite seat, typing furiously on a tablet, was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed by Savile Row. This was Nathaniel Pierce. To the public, he was a ghost, a high-end fixer and attorney whose name appeared only in the most confidential of files. To Isabella, he was her right hand. "Did he take the bait?" Nathaniel asked without looking up. "Hook, line, and sinker," Isabella said, her voice changing completely. Gone was the timid, broken housewife. In her place was a woman who spoke with the cold precision of a military general. She kicked off her cheap heels, revealing a perfect pedicure, and opened a hidden compartment to retrieve a pair of Christian Louboutins. "He threw money at me, Nathaniel. Literally." "Classy," Nathaniel murmured. "I assume you want to proceed with the scorched earth protocol." "He said the checks bounced," Isabella said, pouring herself a glass of sparkling water from the car's console. He lied to the room. He thinks he's posting a $12 million profit. Nathaniel finally looked up, a cruel glint in his eyes. He was posting a profit until 30 seconds ago. I've triggered the clauses. Isabella took a sip of water. Show me. Nathaniel tapped the tablet and swiveled it around. It displayed a complex web of financial holdings, shell companies and offshore trusts. Richard thinks he owns Sterling Logistics, Nathaniel explained, walking through the data. He thinks he founded it with that loan from his father. He forgets that his father's loan was secured by a guarantor hidden behind 3 layers of blind trusts. The Aurora Trust, Isabella said. Correct. And the Aurora Trust is wholly owned by Hart International. You. Nathaniel tapped the screen. Technically, you have held the controlling debt interest in his company for 9 years. You let him play CEO because it kept him busy and out of your hair while you built the real empire. Isabella looked out the window as the Rolls-Royce glided through the Manhattan traffic. I loved him once, you know. That's why I did it. I wanted him to feel like a man. I wanted him to succeed. I funneled my own inheritance, the money my grandmother left me from the oil fields in Texas, into his failing logistics company. I cooked the books legally, so he'd never know he was bankrupt 3 times over. And his repayment was adultery and humiliation, Nathaniel noted dryly. Chloe, Isabella said, saying the name like it was a disease. He bought her a condo in Soho last week, using the corporate card. My corporate card, effectively. So what's the first move? Isabella looked at the tablet. He mentioned the hotel. He told me if I came back to his hotel, he'd arrest me. The Plaza event is rented, but he's staying in the penthouse suite for the week, Nathaniel confirmed. He put it on the company tab. Who insures the company's liabilities? Isabella asked. Vanguard Indemnity, which is a subsidiary of, well, you. Pull the insurance, Isabella commanded. Right now. Flag the event as a high-risk, unauthorized gathering due to breach of conduct, specifically the CEO assaulting a woman on the premises. Void the liability policy for the night. Nathaniel's fingers flew across the keyboard. Done. Notification sent to the Plaza Hotel management. Without insurance, they can't legally host the event. The fire marshal will be notified automatically by their system. Good. What else? His credit lines, Nathaniel said. He has a personal line of credit with Chase and a corporate line with Goldman. Both are secured by his stock in Sterling Logistics. Dump the stock, Isabella said. Nathaniel paused. All of it. If we dump the hidden shares you hold, the stock price will crater. It'll wipe out 60% of the company's value in 10 minutes. The algorithmic traders will pick up the sell-off and panic. Do it, Isabella said, her eyes cold. He wanted to throw cash. Let's see how he handles it when the cash turns to ash. Nathaniel hit enter. Back inside the ballroom, Richard Sterling was laughing at a joke made by a senator. He felt like a king. He reached for his phone to check the time. He had 42 missed calls, 14 text messages, and 1 notification from his bank account frozen suspicious activity. A young waiter looking pale and terrified approached the table. He whispered in Richard's ear. Mr. Sterling, the hotel manager is here. He says you have to shut down the party immediately. Richard stood up, his face flushing red. What do you know who I am? I do, sir. The waiter stammered. But the manager says your insurance policy was just cancelled. And, sir, the police are outside. Police for what? For fraud, sir. Something about embezzlement of Funds from the Aurora Trust. Richard blinked. He had never heard of the Aurora Trust. He looked around the room. The music had stopped. People were checking their phones. The murmurs started. "Look at the stock ticker," someone shouted from the back. Richard looked up at the giant screen behind the stage, which was displaying the company's achievements. Someone in the AV booth, panicked, had switched the feed to CNBC. The ticker for Sterling Logistics, SLOG, was in freefall. It wasn't just dropping. It was plummeting. A red line going straight down. Slog. -45%, -52%, -60%. "My money?" Richard whispered. That's all my money." In the back of the Rolls-Royce, miles away, Isabella watched the same feed on the tablet. "We're just getting started," she whispered. "Nathaniel, take us to the airfield. The jet is fueled. The Gulf Stream is ready. Ms. Hart, to London." "To London?" She nodded. "I have a meeting with the board of directors of the bank that holds Richard's mortgage. It's time they met their majority shareholder." The sidewalk outside the Plaza Hotel was cold, but Richard Sterling was sweating. 30 minutes ago, he was the king of logistics. Now he was standing on 58th Street, watching a tow truck hook up his Aston Martin DB11. "Hey, that's my car!" Richard yelled, sprinting toward the driver. "Put it down! I'll sue you into oblivion!" The driver, a burly man who looked like he'd heard that threat 1,000 times, didn't even look up. "Repo order just came in, pal. Bank says the lease is in default." "Default? I paid the lease up front for the year." "Take it up with the bank. I just drive the truck." Richard fumbled for his phone to call his assistant, but a hand grabbed his arm. It was Chloe. Her mascara was running, but her eyes were furious. "My card was declined," she screeched, holding up a platinum credit card Richard had given her as an authorized user. "I tried to buy a flight to Miami to get away from this mess, and the lady at the counter cut it up. She cut it up in front of everyone." "Richard, Chloe, calm down, it's a glitch," Richard snapped, shaking her off. "The bank's system is down. It's a hack. I need to get to the office." "A hack?" Chloe scoffed. She pulled out her own phone. "Look at Twitter. Richard #Sterling bankrupt is trending. They're saying you were running a Ponzi scheme. They're saying you're broke." She looked at him with sudden, sharp clarity. The adoration was gone. She looked at his disheveled suit, the panic in his eyes. "I'm going to stay with my sister," she said coldly. "Chloe, wait. Don't call me until you fix this." She hailed a cab, an UberX Richard noted with disgust, and left him standing on the curb. Richard ran 5 blocks to the Sterling Logistics headquarters on 6th Avenue. He burst into the lobby expecting security to salute him. Instead, the turnstile flashed red. Access denied. "Let me in!" he screamed, pounding on the glass. The head of security, a man Richard had fired and rehired twice just for the power trip, walked over slowly. He didn't open the gate. "Mr. Sterling, the board has suspended your clearance pending an internal investigation." "The board, I am the board. Open this damn gate." "You were the board," a voice said from behind the guard. Arthur Vance, the company's general counsel, walked into the lobby. He looked tired. He was holding a thick file. "Arthur, thank God," Richard breathed. "Tell this moron to let me in. We need to issue a press release. We need to stop the stock bleeding." Arthur shook his head sadly. He swiped his badge, walked through the turnstile, and handed Richard the file through the gap in the glass. "It's over, Richard." "What's over? The company. We just received a notice of immediate debt recall from the primary lender, the Aurora Trust." "I keep hearing that name," Richard shouted. Who the hell is the Aurora Trust? I thought we were financed by Deutsche Bank. Deutsche Bank was just the servicer, Arthur explained, his voice hushed. The capital came from a private equity fund, the Aurora Trust. The contract you signed 10 years ago, the one you didn't read because you were too busy planning your yacht trip, gave them the right to recall the entire loan if the CEO's moral turpitude damaged the brand. Moral turpitude. Assaulting your ex-wife at the Plaza Richard. It's on video. TMZ has it. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. So they recall the loan. We pay them off. We have assets. We have nothing, Arthur said bluntly. The trust also holds the liens on the warehouses, the trucks and the IP. They've foreclosed. It's effective immediately. The locks are being changed as we speak. Richard stared at the file in his hand. He flipped it open. He stared at the signature line for the Aurora Trust. It wasn't a signature. It was a stamp, represented by H.I. Holdings. H.I., Richard muttered. Who is H.I.? Arthur looked at him with a mix of pity and disbelief. Richard, think. Who was the only person who believed in you when you started this company? Who gave you the seed money you claimed was from your inheritance? Richard's mind flashed back. 10 years ago. A small apartment in Queens. Isabella sitting at the kitchen table looking over his business plan. She had told him she had some money from a relative. She had handled the paperwork. No, Richard whispered. No, she's a housewife. She coupons. She shops at Target. She owns the building we're standing in. Richard, Arthur said softly. I just saw the deed transfer. H. I stands for Heart International. Isabella's maiden name. Richard dropped the file. The papers scattered across the marble floor of the lobby he used to think was his. London was grey and rainy, a stark contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled silence of the penthouse on the 71st floor of the Shard. Isabella stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the Thames. She wore a white silk power suit that cost more than Richard's annual settlement offer. The board is seated, Ms. Hart, Nathaniel said, walking into the room. He placed a cup of Earl Grey tea on the glass table. How is he taking it? Isabella asked, not turning around. Badly. He tried to break into his own office. Security has footage. It's quite pathetic. Nathaniel tapped his tablet. He's currently at a bar in Midtown, racking up a tab he can't pay. Isabella turned. Her face was impassive. And the margin call triggered. His personal portfolio has been liquidated to cover the stock crash. He is for all intents and purposes destitute. He has about $4,000 left in a checking account we didn't touch, just so he can afford a flight to come beg. He won't beg yet, Isabella said. He's too arrogant. He'll get angry first. As if on cue, her satellite phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Isabella picked it up. Hello, Richard. There was a heavy silence on the other end. Then a voice that sounded like gravel and rage. You. Me, Isabella replied calmly. You did this, Richard hissed. The background noise of a busy bar filtered through. You set me up. You manipulated me for 10 years. I supported you for 10 years, Isabella corrected him. I gave you the money to start. I gave you the connections, though you thought they were yours. I let you play the big man, because I thought it would make you happy. I thought if you felt successful, you'd be a good husband. She took a sip of tea. I was wrong. Money just made you more of what you already were. A bully. I'm going to kill you, Richard slurred. I'm going to find you and You're going to do nothing. Isabella cut in her voice, sharpening like a knife. Because you're not in a position to make threats. You're in a position to listen. I want my company back. It was never your company. It was an investment, and I've decided to restructure my portfolio. Restructure. Richard laughed a manic sound. You destroyed it. The stock is worthless. The stock is worthless because you were the face of it, Isabella said. But the assets, the logistics network, the software, that's all valuable. And in about an hour, I'm going into a meeting with the Royal Bank of Scotland to finalize the acquisition of those assets under a new brand. You can't do that. I already have. Oh, and Richard. What? I heard you're staying at the penthouse at the plaza. I suggest you check out. I've instructed the hotel to charge the full rate to your personal card, which I believe has a limit of 0. Isabella, please. His voice cracked. The anger was slipping, revealing the fear underneath. I have nowhere to go. Chloe left me. My apartment is sealed. Do you remember where we lived when we got married, Richard? Queens, he muttered. Astoria. 34th Street, she said. I bought that building a few years ago. I kept our old apartment empty. Key is under the mat. It's paid up for a month. Consider it my final settlement. You expect me to live in that dump? Richard spat. I'm Richard Sterling. Not anymore, Isabella said. Now you're just Richard, the man who threw money at his wife. She hung up the phone and handed it to Nathaniel. He's coming to London, she said. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow. He has no passport. You had his lawyer surrender it during the divorce proceedings. Remember, flight risk. Isabella smiled. He'll find a way. He's desperate. And when he gets here, I want him to see what he really lost. She walked toward the double doors of the conference room. Ms. Hart, Nathaniel asked. Yes. Why give him the apartment? Why not let him sleep on the street? Isabella paused, her hand on the door handle. Because, she said, her eyes darkening, I want him to sit in that tiny kitchen, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and remember every single day he took me for granted. The street is too easy. Memories. Memories are the real torture. She pushed the doors open. 12 men in suits stood up immediately. Gentlemen, Isabella said, taking her seat at the head of the table. Let's discuss the future of global logistics. Richard Sterling did not go to Queens. The very idea of the F train was an insult to his DNA. Instead, he went to the one place he thought he still had power, the Metropolitan Club on Fifth Avenue. He had been a member for 15 years. He had paid for the renovation of the cigar lounge, but as he pushed through the revolving doors, wet from the rain and smelling faintly of panic, the concierge didn't smile. Mr. Sterling, the man said, stepping out from behind the marble desk. I'm afraid your membership has been revoked. Revoked. Richard wiped water from his forehead. By who the board doesn't meet until Tuesday. By the owner of the building, sir. A clause regarding reputational risk. You're asked to leave. Richard stumbled back out onto the street. He checked his pockets. He had his phone battery at 12% a pack of gum and the Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime on his wrist. It was worth $2 million. He looked at the watch. It was his ticket out. He found a high-end pawn shop in the Diamond District, a place that didn't ask questions. The broker, a man with thick glasses named Solomon, looked at the watch, then at Richard. It's real, Richard snapped. Give me 100 grand. Cash. Solomon sighed. Mr. Sterling, I know it's real. I also know that this watch was listed as collateral in the Sterling Logistics bankruptcy filing an hour ago. If I buy this, I'm receiving stolen goods. Richard felt the walls closing in. "I need to get to London," he whispered. "I need a flight." Solomon looked at him with pity. "I can't give you cash, but my cousin runs a freight charter out of Teterboro, not a passenger jet. Cargo. He's flying auto parts to Heathrow tonight. He might take a passenger if you give him the watch." "You want me to trade a $2 million watch for a ride in a cargo plane? It's that or the subway, Mr. Sterling." 6 hours later, Richard Sterling, the man who used to complain if his champagne wasn't chilled to exactly 48 degrees, was sitting on a crate strapped to the floor of a freezing cold Boeing 747 freighter. The noise was deafening. There was no heating in the cargo hold. He huddled in his ruined Brioni suit, shivering violently. He spent the 7-hour flight staring at a pallet of brake pads, his mind looping through a reel of rage. She planned this, he thought. Every dinner, every smile, every time she asked about my day. She was taking notes. She was waiting. He didn't feel remorse. He felt a burning, obsessive need to win. He convinced himself that if he could just get to London, if he could just walk into that boardroom, he could charm them. He could explain that his wife was hysterical, a scorned woman. The banks would listen to him. He was the visionary. The plane landed at Heathrow in the grey, pre-dawn light. Richard was smuggled out of a maintenance hangarette, stiff and frostbitten. He had no luggage. He had no money. He walked to the tube station, jumped the turnstile, and headed for the City of London. He looked like a ghost. His eyes were bloodshot. His stubble was greying, and his suit was stained with hydraulic fluid. But as he looked in the reflection in the train window, he didn't see a broken man. He saw a man with nothing left to lose. And those are the most dangerous men of all. The venue for the Future of Logistics Summit was the Tate Modern. The massive turbine hall had been transformed into a sleek, futuristic auditorium. The press was there in droves. Rumors were swirling. Sterling Logistics had fallen, but something new was rising from its ashes. The invitation simply said, "Heart." Richard arrived at the entrance. Security was tight. Men with earpieces checked IDs against digital lists. Richard watched from behind a pillar. He couldn't just walk in. He needed a distraction. He saw a catering van unloading crates of wine at the side entrance. The driver was distracted, arguing on his phone. Richard didn't hesitate. He grabbed a crate of Merlot, hoisted it onto his shoulder to hide his face, and walked confidently past the driver. "Late delivery," he barked at the guard by the service door. The guard, seeing the heavy crate and the suit which, despite the stains, was still clearly expensive, assumed he was a sommelier or a manager. He waved him through. Richard ditched the wine in a hallway and made his way to the main floor. The lights were dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage. And there she was. Isabella stood alone on the stage. She looked radiant, terrifyingly powerful. Behind her, a massive screen displayed a map of the world. Glowing lines connected thousands of cities. "For too long," Isabella spoke into the microphone, her voice crisp and amplified. "Global logistics has been about moving boxes. It has been efficient, but it has been heartless. We treated employees like numbers and clients like cash cows." Richard bristled. "She's talking about me." "Today, Sterling Logistics is dead," Isabella announced. A gasp went through the crowd. "We are dissolving the brand. We are absorbing the infrastructure into a new entity, Heart Global." She clicked a remote. The screen changed. It showed a list of subsidiaries, not just trucking, shipping lines, air freight, warehousing robotics, data analytics firms. Hart Global, Isabella continued, is not just a logistics company. It is an ecosystem, and we are fully solvent. In fact, we are debt-free. Richard couldn't take it anymore. The adrenaline spiked. He pushed through the crowd of seated journalists. "Liar!" he screamed. The room froze. Spotlights swung around, searching for the disturbance. They found Richard standing in the center aisle, looking like a deranged beggar. "Richard," someone whispered. "Is that Richard Sterling?" "She's a liar," Richard shouted, pointing a shaking finger at the stage. "She stole it. She stole my company. I built this. I built all of this." Security guards started to move toward him, but Isabella raised a hand. "Wait," she said. Her voice was calm. "Let him speak." The guards stopped. Richard stumbled forward, emboldened. He climbed the stairs to the stage. He stood 10 feet away from her. The contrast was brutal. She was pristine, glowing in white silk. He was filthy, smelling of sweat and oil. "Tell them," Richard panted, grabbing a podium for support. "Tell them how you tricked me. Tell them how you set me up." Isabella looked at him. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. "I didn't trick you, Richard," she said, her voice echoing through the silent hall. "I bought you." "You... what?" "Turn around," she said. Richard turned to look at the massive screen behind him. The image changed. It wasn't a business chart anymore. It was a timeline. 2014. Richard Sterling files for personal bankruptcy. Sealed. 2015. Hart International purchases Sterling debt for pennies on the dollar. 2018. Hart International secretly funds the acquisition of Omega Shipping. 2021. Richard Sterling spends $4 million of company funds on private jet travel, covered by heart injection. The list went on. Every time Richard had failed, Isabella had quietly bailed him out. Every time he thought he had made a brilliant deal, it was Isabella's holding company on the other side feeding him the win. "You were never the CEO, Richard," Isabella said softly, stepping closer to him. The microphone picked up every breath. "You were the mascot. I let you wear the suit. I let you cut the ribbons. But I made the decisions. I wrote the code. I negotiated the trade deals while you were golfing." Richard stared at the screen. The reality washed over him. He wasn't a victim of theft. He was a fraud. He had been a fraud for 10 years. "Why?" he whispered, his voice broken. "Why let me believe it?" Isabella's expression softened, just for a fraction of a second, before hardening into diamond. "Because I wanted to see if you would ever grow up," she said. "I gave you the world, Richard. I thought maybe if you felt secure, you'd stop hurting people. You'd stop cheating. You'd stop belittling the staff. But you didn't. You got worse. The money didn't change you. It revealed you." She turned to the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, Hart Global is built on transparency. We have removed the inefficiencies." She gestured to Richard. "As you can see, the dead weight has been cut loose." The audience erupted, not in applause, but in the frantic clicking of cameras. Flashbulbs blinded Richard. He stood there exposed, stripped of his narrative, stripped of his dignity. "Get him out of here," Isabella said, turning her back on him. 2 large security guards grabbed Richard by the arms. He didn't fight. His legs had turned to jelly. As they dragged him off the stage, he looked back at her one last time. She was already talking to the shareholders, pointing at a graph of projected earnings. She didn't even look back. He was thrown out of the side door. the same one he had sneaked into the rainy London alley. He landed in a puddle. As he lay there, soaking wet, a pair of polished black shoes stopped in front of his face. He looked up. It was Nathaniel. "Ms. Hart has one final message for you," Nathaniel said, opening a black umbrella. He reached into his pocket and dropped a small plastic rectangle onto Richard's chest. It was an Oyster card, a subway pass. "It has £20 on it," Nathaniel said. "She suggests you don't spend it all in one place." Nathaniel turned and walked away, leaving Richard alone in the rain, clutching the subway pass like it was the last lifeline on earth. But the story wasn't over. Because as Richard sat in the mud, a black sedan pulled up to the alley entrance. The window rolled down. A man with a thick Russian accent and a scar running down his cheek looked out. "Mr. Sterling?" the Russian asked. Richard nodded slowly. "My employer saw the broadcast," the man said. "He hates Isabella Hart. He hates what she represents. He thinks you and he might have common interests." The back door clicked open. Richard looked at the subway pass. Then he looked at the open car door. The darkness in him hadn't died. It was just looking for a new sponsor. He stood up, wiped the mud from his face, and climbed into the car. The black sedan moved through the arteries of London like a predator swimming through dark water. Rain lashed against the tinted windows, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon blood and bruised purple. Inside, the air was hermetically sealed, smelling of expensive leather and the sour metallic tang of Richard's own fear. Richard sat in the back seat, his hands trembling. He clenched them into fists to hide the shaking, digging his fingernails into his palms until they left crescent-shaped marks. Beside him sat the man who called himself Victor. Victor was a terrifying figure. He wore a coat made of wool so dark it seemed to absorb the ambient light. A jagged scar ran from his left ear down to his jawline, pulling his mouth into a perpetual cynical sneer. He hadn't spoken since they picked Richard up from the alley behind the Tate Modern, but the silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with unspoken violence and illicit promise. Richard looked out the window at the passing cityscape. He saw the towering silhouette of the Shard piercing the clouds in the distance. Isabella was up there. She was probably drinking champagne, laughing with her board members, toasting to the destruction of Richard Sterling. The thought made bile rise in his throat. "She humiliated you," Victor said suddenly. His voice was a low rumble like gravel grinding together. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Richard turned his eyes bloodshot and wild. "She stole my life. She stood on that stage and told the world I was a fraud." "And are you?" Victor asked, turning his head slowly. His eyes were cold, devoid of empathy. "I built that company," Richard shouted, his voice cracking. "I was the face. The clients trusted me, not some shadow-holding company. She thinks she can just cut me out. She thinks she can erase me." Victor reached into his coat pocket. Richard flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, Victor pulled out a sleek industrial-grade tablet and tapped the screen. He handed it to Richard. "Then do not let her," Victor said. "My employer represents a consortium of logistics competitors, Russian, Chinese, American. They are concerned by the monopoly Hart Global is about to create. They want the playing field leveled." Richard looked down at the tablet. Illuminated on the screen was a login portal. It was familiar, painfully familiar. It was the back-end administrative access to the Sterling Logistics mainframe, the central nervous system of the company he used to rule. "Isabella is arrogant." Victor continued, his voice smooth and seductive. She believes she has already won. Tonight, she is migrating the master database from the old Sterling servers to her new Heart global cloud. For the next hour, the firewall is in a state of flux. It is vulnerable. Vulnerable how? Richard breathed, his heart beginning to hammer against his ribs. It will accept a legacy override, Victor explained. If an administrator with level 5 clearance were to log in and issue a system purge command, the migration would fail. The data on the old servers would be wiped before it reaches the new ones. Client lists, shipping routes, financial records, tracking algorithms gone. Irrecoverable. Richard stared at the glowing blue screen. It would cause billions in damage. It would cripple her before she even starts. It would kill the giant, Victor corrected him. And you would be the giant slayer. And for me? Richard asked, looking up. What do I get out of this besides revenge? £5 million, Victor said calmly, deposited into a crypto wallet of your choice. And a new identity. Passport visa, a new history. You can disappear to Dubai, to Singapore, to Rio. You can start again. You can be a king again. Richard looked back at the shard. The rain was falling harder now, drumming a rhythm of war on the roof of the car. He thought about the £20 Oyster card in his pocket. He thought about the cold cargo plane. He thought about the laughter of the audience at the Tate Modern. He didn't see the moral precipice he was standing on. He only saw a ladder. Take me to the terminal, Richard said. The car pulled into a desolate industrial park on the outskirts of East London. The buildings here were skeletal, rusted husks of the city's manufacturing past. Victor led Richard into a nondescript warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside. Inside, however, it was a fortress of technology. Banks of servers hummed in the darkness, their LED status lights blinking like hundreds of unblinking eyes. The room was freezing, kept at sub-zero temperatures to cool the massive computing power. This is a ghost node, Victor explained, his footsteps echoing on the concrete floor. We have mirrored the connection. You can execute the command from here, and it will look like a system error from within the shard itself. He pointed to a single console sitting in the center of the room, a solitary chair, and a keyboard illuminated by a harsh halogen lamp. It looked like an executioner's chair. Richard walked toward it. His legs felt heavy, but his mind was racing with adrenaline. He sat down. The chair was cold. He placed his hands on the keyboard. It felt good. It felt right. For the first time in days, he had control. Do it, Victor commanded from the shadows behind him. The migration is at 80%. If you wait too long, the data will be safe. Richard cracked his knuckles. He took a deep breath. He typed in his username. It was a name he had chosen 10 years ago, in a burst of ego, king_R. The system prompted for a password. Isabella had changed the locks on the building, she had cancelled his credit cards, and she had seized his assets. But she had forgotten the one thing Richard prided himself on: his paranoia. Years ago, he had paid a corrupt developer to install a backdoor, a master key that would bypass all security protocols. He had never used it. He had saved it for a rainy day. And it was pouring. He typed it in, "Long live the King One." The screen flashed green. Access granted. Administrator privileges unlocked. Richard laughed. It started as a chuckle and erupted into a manic, breathless cackle that bounced off the metal walls. She missed it. The genius Isabella Hart missed it. I'm in. I'm inside the brain of the company. Execute the wipe, Victor said sharply. He was checking his watch. Now, Richard. Richard's finger hovered over the enter key. He paused for a fraction of a second. In that moment, he could have walked away. He could have taken his subway pass and disappeared into the night, poor but free. But the darkness in him was too deep. He didn't just want to survive. He wanted her to suffer. "Goodbye, Bella," he whispered. He pressed the key with all his strength. The screen didn't go black. It didn't display a deletion confirmed message. Instead, the monitors flickered violently. A high-pitched whine filled the room. Then the screen turned a blinding, brilliant white. A video window popped up, expanding to fill the entire display. It wasn't code. It was a high-definition live stream. Richard squinted against the glare. The image resolved. It was an office, a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the London skyline. Sitting at a glass desk, bathed in the warm glow of a desk lamp, was Isabella. She wasn't working. She wasn't panicked. She was sitting with her hands folded on the desk, looking directly into the camera lens, looking directly at him. "Hello, Richard," she said. Her voice was crystal clear, amplified by the warehouse speakers. It sounded like the voice of God. Richard froze. His blood ran cold, turning to ice in his veins. He spun around in his chair. "Victor, shoot the screen. It's a trace. She's tracing us." Victor didn't move. He didn't reach for a gun. He stood there, arms crossed, his face impassive. Slowly he reached up to his ear and pulled out a small, transparent earpiece. "His name isn't Victor," Isabella said from the screen, her voice calm and conversational. "His name is Simon. He is the head of penetration testing for Hart Global Security. He's been on my payroll for 6 years. Richard stumbled back, knocking his chair over with a loud clang. He looked at the Russian mobster, then back at the screen. No. This is a setup. I'm in a car. I was with the syndicate. You are in Hart Global's off-site disaster recovery facility in Dagenham, Isabella corrected him. And you have just failed the final test. Isabella leaned forward. Her eyes were hard like flint. "I knew about the back door, Richard," she said softly. "I knew about long live the king. Did you really think I would secure a $1 trillion empire and forget to check the code I left that vulnerability there? I left it open. For you. You baited me," Richard gasped. He felt like he couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. "I gave you a choice," Isabella said. "I had a settlement agreement drafted on my desk this morning. A monthly stipend, a small apartment in Chelsea. Enough for you to live quietly, to find some dignity, to maybe become a better man. All you had to do was walk away. All you had to do was accept that you had lost." She picked up a thick file from her desk. She held it up for him to see. It was labeled Sterling Settlement. "But I knew you wouldn't," she continued, her voice tinged with a sad, weary disappointment. "I knew that if I dangled the chance to destroy me in front of you, you would take it. You wouldn't care about the employees. You wouldn't care about the law. You would only care about your ego." She dropped the file into a shredder beside her desk. The sound of the paper tearing was the loudest thing in the world. "This is entrapment," Richard screamed, backing away, until he hit the cold metal of a server rack. "You tricked me. No judge will convict me. Entrapment requires law enforcement to coerce you into committing a crime you otherwise wouldn't have committed." Simon, no longer using his fake accent, said calmly, "I didn't coerce you, Richard. I offered you a ride. You chose to get in." You chose to type the password. You chose to press the button. And, Isabella added, you just attempted to execute a massive cyber attack on a global financial entity. You attempted industrial sabotage and corporate espionage. Since the servers you tried to wipe are technically located in our Dublin jurisdiction, this is international wire fraud. Richard looked for an exit. The warehouse door was 100 feet away. He could run. He could make it. He bolted. "Don't," Simon said. He didn't shout. He just raised his hand. He wasn't holding a gun. He was holding a remote control. He pressed a button. The heavy steel shutters on the warehouse windows rolled up with a mechanical roar. Instantly, the room was flooded with flashing blue and red lights. The wail of sirens, which had been muffled by the insulation, now screamed into the space. Through the windows, Richard saw them 5 police cruisers, an armed tactical unit, and a black van. They had been there the whole time, waiting. Richard stopped running. He fell to his knees. The fight drained out of him, leaving nothing but a hollow shell. He looked back at the screen. "Isabella, please," he sobbed, the tears cutting through the grime on his face. "I'm sorry. I was angry. I didn't mean it. Don't let them take me. I can't go to prison. I'm Richard Sterling." Isabella watched him on her monitor. For a second, her mask slipped. There was pain in her eyes, the pain of a woman who had wasted 10 years loving a man who didn't exist. But then she remembered the money hitting her face in the ballroom. She remembered the insults. She remembered the cruelty. "You're not Richard Sterling," she said, her voice final. "You're just Richard, and you're out of chances." She reached out and pressed a key on her keyboard. Connection terminated. The screen in the warehouse went black. The side doors burst open. "Police, armed police, stay on the ground." Men in tactical gear swarmed the room. Richard felt heavy boots on his back pushing him into the cold concrete. He felt the cold steel of handcuffs ratcheting tight around his wrists, tighter than the Patek Philippe he had lost, tighter than the wedding band he had thrown away. "Richard Sterling," an officer recited, hauling him to his feet. "You are under arrest for attempted grand larceny, computer misuse, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they dragged him toward the exit, his feet scraping uselessly against the floor. Richard's pocket caught on the edge of a server rack. The plastic Oyster card, the 20-pound subway pass Nathaniel had given him, slipped out. It skittered across the floor, spinning to a stop at Simon's feet. Simon looked down at it, then up at the broken man being shoved into the back of a police van. He didn't pick it up. High above the city in the silence of the Shard, Isabella Hart stood up. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the cool glass. Below her, London was a sprawling web of lights moving and flowing like the logistics network she now commanded alone. She had won. The parasite was gone. The empire was secure. She should have felt triumphant. She should have popped the champagne. Instead, she felt a profound, echoing quiet. She realized then that revenge is not a sweet dish. It is a necessary surgery. It removes the rot, it saves the patient, but it leaves a scar that never quite fades. Isabella turned off the lights in her office, plunging the room into darkness. She picked up her bag, walked to the door, and didn't look back. The story of Richard Sterling was over. The era of the heart had begun. Richard Sterling was sentenced to 8 years in Wandsworth Prison. He entered the gates, still wearing the ruined suit he had worn to the gala, a symbol of the life he destroyed with his own hands. Isabella Hart went on to become one of the most powerful CEOs in modern history, using her empire to fund scholarships for women in business, ensuring that the next generation wouldn't have to hide their brilliance to protect a man's ego. But this story isn't just about money or revenge. It's about the cost of arrogance. Richard thought his value came from his title, his watch, and his bank account. He threw money in his wife's face because he thought it made him powerful. He never realized that the true power wasn't in the cash. It was in the woman who had the patience to build him up and the strength to tear him down when he forgot who held the foundation. What do you think? Was Isabella's trap too cruel? Or did Richard get exactly what he deserved? Let me know your verdict in the comments below. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of justice, betrayal, and karma, please smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss the next episode. I'll see you in the next story.